Most people think they're standing on solid ground, but let's be real. You're not grounded, you're just stuck. You call it being busy, I call it running from yourself. You scroll, you complain, you drink overpriced coffee pretending to be deep, but when life actually hits, you crumble, and then you say, I'm just burnt out. No, you're not burnt out, you're unrooted. You built your life on emotional quicksand and called it progress. What if strength isn't about grinding harder or building bigger, but about finding the ground beneath the chaos? That's exactly what Brené Brown is here to teach us in her newest book, Strong Ground, The Lessons of Daring Leadership, the Tenacity of Paradox, and the Wisdom of the Human Spirit. And trust me, this book doesn't just hand out motivational fluff, it calls you out. It slaps your ego, hugs your humanity, and then dares you to stand up straighter than you ever have. Disclaimer, this video falls under the Fair Use Act. It's for educational purposes only, to analyze and transform the ideas of Brené Brown's book through new commentary, insight, and brutal honesty. Now, who is Brené Brown? She's not your typical feel-good, self-help author. She's a research professor, a social worker, and more importantly, a human excavator. Her life's work digs into the messy layers of shame, courage, and connection. You might know her from Daring Greatly, or Atlas of the Heart, or that viral TED Talk that made half the world realize they've been emotionally constipated for decades. But in Strong Ground, Brené takes a more grounded, gritty turn. She starts with a story about pain, literal pain, on a pickleball court. She's not preaching from a mountaintop, she's writing from the floor, writhing in pain, learning humility one nerve spasm at a time. The premise? You can't build strength on dysfunction, you can't build confidence on chaos, and you sure as hell can't build courage while you're pretending not to be scared. This book is a manifesto on how to stop pretending and start strengthening, not just in your body, but in your leadership, your work, your relationships, and your identity. Because Brené's challenge is simple but uncomfortable. We will not build on dysfunction, and let's be honest, that's a direct shot at most of us. We say we want growth, but we avoid accountability. We crave change, but refuse to face our own weakness. We dream of leadership, but treat people like tools. This book says, enough. So today, we're going to dig deep into Strong Ground. We'll expose the myths of modern strength, the lie of hustle culture, and the truth about why most people never actually transform. By the end of this breakdown, you won't just understand the book, you'll feel it in your gut. Welcome to Mindful Reads Hub. Let's get started. Standing on strong ground, the art of staying still in the storm. It's funny how America keeps shouting about progress while everyone secretly feels like they're about to collapse. The economy's still gasping under the weight of inflation that refuses to die. CEOs are firing people with the same empathy they'd reserve for a broken printer, and every motivational podcast keeps telling you to grind harder, as if the cure for existential exhaustion is another spreadsheet. Everyone's chasing higher ground, but almost no one remembers how to stand still. That's where Brené Brown's story hits like a sledgehammer wrapped in compassion. She doesn't open with theory or philosophy, she opens with pain. A literal back-breaking moment on a pickleball court that forces her to confront a truth most of us run from. Strength means nothing if the foundation is weak. We love to brag about how fast we move, how much we juggle, how unshakable we are, until life knocks us flat and reminds us that all our confidence was built on dysfunction. Her trainer, Tony, becomes the voice none of us want to hear, the kind that says, we will not build on dysfunction. Translation? Stop pretending your chaos is a personality trait. Stop calling anxiety drive. You can't hack your way to peace when your entire nervous system is in fight or flight. The foundation of power isn't motion, it's stability. Brown learns this through her body, and we through her words. What makes Strong Ground different from the usual find your purpose nonsense is that it doesn't worship intensity, it worships intentionality. Tony tells her, We're not looking for wild intensity. We're looking for consistency. That line should be printed on the walls of every office in America. We've become addicted to adrenaline, to the dopamine rush of busy, but adrenaline is a liar. It convinces you that movement is progress. It's not. It's often just panic in disguise. Brown's awakening is both physical and spiritual. She learns that the body, like a nation, collapses when its core is weak, and its leadership, your mind, refuses to listen. She literally has to find the ground again, not the gym floor, but the real ground, the one beneath her feet, the one that says, "You are here, you are alive, now act like it." It's a metaphor for everything modern life forgets. We've built skyscrapers of ambition on fault lines of exhaustion, and if you zoom out, this isn't just personal, it's cultural. Look around. Companies are crumbling because they've been building innovation on top of toxic systems. The political divide widens because no one wants to do the foundational work of empathy. Even AI, the golden child of our century, is being built on the data of our dysfunction. We are collectively doing exactly what Brené's trainer warned her not to do, building on pain, calling it progress. Her lesson extends beyond muscles and movement. It's about how we lead, love, and exist. She draws a sharp line between temporary power and true strength. Temporary power is loud, impatient, and terrified of stillness. True strength is quiet, grounded, and brutally self-aware. It doesn't need applause because it's rooted in something deeper, integrity. Then comes the metaphor that ties it all together, the tush push. An NFL play that physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson calls a triumph of physics and teamwork, a line of players pushing forward as one, grounded so deeply that their combined force moves the earth, even if just slightly. That's the beauty of it. They win not because they're faster or stronger, but because they're more connected to the ground. That's leadership. That's love. That's life. Real power isn't vertical. It's horizontal. It's the force that comes from collective grounding, from alignment, from shared direction. America's obsession with individualism has made us forget that every empire falls when its people stop moving together. So when Brené Brown whispers to herself, "Strong ground, Brené, strong ground," it's not a mantra, it's a rebellion, a refusal to keep pretending that we can sprint our way to meaning. It's the same lesson every burned out founder, every anxious parent, every disillusioned 20-something needs right now. Stop chasing higher ground, learn to stand firmly where you already are. Because if you don't find your ground, life will do it for you, usually by knocking you flat. Key takeaway: strength without grounding is just chaos with good branding. Before you lead, fix your foundation. Before you rise, remember your roots. Favorite quote: "We will not build on dysfunction. We'll build on healthy functioning and a healthy foundation." Victory and vulnerability, what winning and losing teach the soul. You ever watch a pro athlete win the championship and then break down crying on camera? We cheer the peak, but we recoil from the cracks. We only want the highlight reel, never the wounds. We confuse victory with immunity, forgetting that every win brings its own ghosts. Brené Brown glues together the thrill and the agony, not as opposites, but as partners. You cannot taste triumph without swallowing the bitterness of risk, failure, doubt. Brown begins by reminding us, the finish line doesn't define you. What defines you is how you fall and how you rise. She draws on stories of leaders who reach pinnacles only to find their core hollow. These people didn't break because they lost. They broke because they weren't anchored. Their victories were built on performance, not purpose. Their bravado masked fragility. She leans on the poetry of Clint Smith's All at Once to remind us that life doesn't wait for neat stories. Smith's lines hit like a punch. All at once, nothing changed, and everything changed. We romanticize the arcs of stories. Hero rises, villain falls. But real life hits in fragments. You laugh, then you cry, then you forget, then you remember. The motion is messy. The mess is where the soul is forged. Brown also examines what we celebrate as victory in modern culture, the metrics, the promotions, the lists, the top 1%. But she warns, chasing external wins as proof of worth invites existential emptiness. You win the deal, but lose your connection. You get the award, but your heart is hollow. You want to be seen, but refuse to be seen in your flaws. She writes about how loss, failure, heartbreak teach more than success ever can. In pain, we must learn to stay tender. The cracks become the light. When you lose, you either spiral into self-loathing or lean into the question, who am I when the applause fades? True victory is not the trophy, it's who you become in its absence. Let me shake you. This is your ego speaking when you say, I can't afford to fail. That fear locks you into mediocrity. You stay small so you won't be exposed. Well, Brown doesn't let you hide. She forces you to live on the edge of your edge, to be brave in defeat, to let pain teach you humility, and to use heartbreak as a doorway home. Look at the real world. In 2025, we've seen executives ousted, social media stars implode, billion-dollar startups collapse. Those don't just illustrate failure. They reveal what happens when identity is tethered to outcomes. The economy tanks, but your soul fractures first. The stock drops by 20%, but your value drops by 100% if you weren't grounded. Everyone's building houses of cards and calling them legacies. This is what Brown wants you to see. You cannot divorce victory from vulnerability. They are twin muscles. If you never risk losing, you'll never know what's worth winning for. If you never open your chest to heartbreak, you'll never heal. If you never sit quietly in your defeat, you're doomed to repeat it louder. Her invocation of poetry isn't aesthetic fluff, it's necessity. Poetry reminds us that life is not linear. It disrupts our tidy narratives. It breathes cracks. Brown uses Smith's poem to crack open our illusions. You'll never outrun the messy parts of your own story, so lean into them. Victory and vulnerability cycle. The fall teaches what the peak can't. When you lose the title, you discover your character. When applause fades, you find your roots. When you're forced to rebuild, you choose what matters, not what sells. We crave a culture that celebrates only winners, never fallers. Brown argues we need to celebrate both. Key idea: victory is hollow if built without vulnerability. Real strength comes when you can fall and still know your worth. Favorite quote: all at once nothing changed and everything changed. The paradox within, when being human is the only superpower left. You think strength is certainty? Then you're living in a fantasy. The real strength, the kind that matters, lives in the cracks, in the tension, in the I don't know. Brené Brown drags us into the paradox. To be truly powerful, human, and wise, you must become comfortable being wrong, unsettled, in between. That's your superpower. She opens with the notion of negative capability, a phrase she borrows from poets and philosophers. Negative capability means staying in uncertainty without demanding quick resolution. It's the capacity to lean into mystery rather than flee from it. We hate that in ourselves. We're trained to look busy, confident, anchored. But the deepest parts of creativity, depth, insight, they come from willingness to live in that in-between place. Brown warns us, if you can't tolerate ambiguity, you'll avoid growth. You'll shrink to what's safe, sterile, and lifeless. Then she pivots to Adam Grant's wisdom. Find reasons you might be wrong. Yes, on purpose. The title sounds like intellectual masochism, but it's survival. Our default is comfort. Our default is defensiveness. We're wired to defend, to preserve image. But few things kill transformation faster than that posture. Grant's challenge is a mirror. Seek disconfirming evidence. Ask questions that unsettle your certainty. The moment you stop asking, are we right? And start asking, how might we be wrong? Is when real learning begins. Brown weaves both ideas, negative capability and intellectual humility, into the same muscle, becoming comfortable in paradox. She tells the story of leaders who face conflicting truths, like needing to stay bold while staying tender, or to plan for the future while holding space for the unknown. She argues that life doesn't give us neat binaries. Reality is messy, with contradictions pulling us in opposite directions. If your identity is rigid, you'll snap. If you can't hold tension, say yes to two conflicting truths, you'll live in fear or dogma. She cites research and her own coaching, showing that people who can hold paradoxical tension, those who can be confident and curious, clear and humble, lead better, love better, live truer. Grant's experiments show that teams who surface dissenting voices outperform those that enforce consensus, because dissent forces re-examination, because every time you get defensive, you lose possibility. To make it real, imagine a CEO in 2025. The economy is wobbling, AI is disrupting, team morale is tanking. The board demands certainty, yet the data is murky. The best move is not certainty, it's courageous curiosity. It's asking, what if I'm wrong? Or, what am I missing? That refusal to live in a bubble of self-assurance may be her greatest leadership act. That posture separates brands that break and those that fossilize. Brown also calls out how spiritual traditions, poetry, art, all teach us to walk with paradox. Because paradox is the human condition. We are mortal and infinite, broken and whole, fragile and fierce. When we deny one side, we become one-dimensional. But when we embrace both, we become alive. She reminds us that paradox doesn't invite paralysis. It invites depth, wisdom, and originality. She challenges us. The next time your mind screams, I have to be right, say, hold on. Let the tension remain. Let the question live. Examine your assumptions. Debate them internally. Don't rush to closure. Let doubts sharpen your convictions, not erode them. Yes, living in ambiguity is disorienting. Yes, you'll have to face fear. Fear of being perceived as weak, indecisive, or wrong. But the alternative, certainty masquerading as arrogance, kills trust, stifles growth, and suffocates authenticity. Key idea: the paradox is not your enemy, it's your edge. True strength is less about being sure, more about being open to being wrong. Favorite quote: paradoxes are unflinching and stubborn. We can run from them when they confuse us. But like me and my subtitle, they never surrender. The anatomy of transformation, breaking down to break through. You think transformation is a crescendo, a bold sweep of change. You're wrong. Real transformation is quiet. It's fissures, collapse, surrender, rebirth, not the flashy reinvention Instagram sells you. Brené Brown drags us into that less glamorous space, the dismantling, the humility, the painful unraveling before the rebuilding. She begins by calling bullshit on fix-it culture, the idea that we just need one strategic pivot, one big push, and we'll be transformed. That's shallow. True change doesn't come from surface tactics. It starts where everything is broken. She insists that we must break down to break through. The path to power is through vulnerability, not avoidance. Brown draws on her Dare to Lead coaching work. She recounts leaders who hit a wall, organizational disruption, moral failures, crumbling trust. They tried to slap on new branding, new slogans, new initiatives, but nothing stuck because nothing was addressed at the interior. Their structures might shift, but their souls stayed fractured. She introduces the idea of interior architecture, the systems, beliefs, relational contracts undergirding every organization and human life. If you don't excavate those foundations, any new design will collapse. She argues that to transform, you must excavate your interior, your fears, your hidden defaults, your power plays, your shadow parts, and that excavation is messy. Then she brings in parallels from medicine, psychology, even wilderness. She notes that growth often comes after crisis. We resist collapse because collapse feels like death, but sometimes death of identity, of ego, of old stories is exactly the gestation point for birth. She points to stories of change. A CEO whose company culture collapsed, then rebuilt from transparency and accountability. A leader who lost all external validation, then reconnected with purpose. These aren't just case studies. They're proof that when the old self dies, the new self can only grow from that soil. She confronts us. We love incremental change because it feels safe, but incremental change rarely transforms. We think small shifts are enough. They're not. To transcend, you must cross a threshold. A threshold demands sacrifice. It demands saying, I don't know, I was wrong, I was complicit. It demands stepping into unknowing. That's terrifying. Most won't go there. They'll cling to the familiar wreckage rather than risk the unknown. Brown also challenges the modern leadership paradox. We demand agility and speed, but we neglect depth. We skip reflection for reaction. We worship the new while ignoring what's beneath. She says the hardest part of transformation isn't design, it's surrendering to the chaos so you can see what needs to be rebuilt. That is the spiritual muscle of leadership. She offers practices for transformation, rumbling, leaning into hard conversations, unearthing stories, vulnerability, allowing others in on your unraveling, anchoring, finding values and principles you'll return to when the storm hits, alignment, making sure structures, language, relationships reflect what you claim to believe. She warns, the outer change must match the inner. Otherwise, you end up with performance masquerading as authenticity. Brown also points out that transformation is non-linear. You'll advance, regress, circle, repeat. This is true in individuals, families, companies, cultures. You think you've arrived and life smacks you back down. But if you can stay grounded, you'll see those failures are part of the spiral upward. Let's bring in the real world pulse. In 2025, we saw mega corporations unravel reputational crises, whistleblowers expose systemic rot, employees demand soul in their work. Boards scramble to transform with AI/DEI, culture initiatives. But many of those efforts fail, not because the ideas are wrong, but because they skipped the interior work. They never excavated the belief systems, the relational ruptures, the unspoken norms. They just slapped on change. The result? More hypocrisy, deeper cynicism. Brown's warning is real. External change without internal transformation is the most dangerous performance. If I were chasing headlines, I'd point to crises at big firms collapsing under brand promise while hiding dysfunction. But what matters is the pattern. Culture rot is always interior rot. If you don't transform from the inside, you just build a prettier cage. So here's what you need to do, but probably won't because it's brutal. Let collapse happen. Don't fight it. Ask the hard questions. What did I deny? What am I avoiding? Where was I complicit? Share your unraveling with people you trust. Vulnerability grows trust. Align your architecture, language, decisions, systems must reflect your ideals. Practice emergence. Give yourself time, space, patience for the new self to take shape. Key idea. Transformation doesn't come from adding more. It comes from letting go, breaking down old structures so new ones can root. Favorite quote, individuals and organizations are building new muscles. Finding our strong ground, that athletic stance, is the only thing that can provide both unwavering stability and a platform for the fast, explosive change the world is demanding. Mission clarity, the difference between moving fast and moving true. You think moving fast is proof of progress? That urgency is the same as direction? In 2025, we've watched tech startups launch features no one uses, companies pivot to AI without asking why, and governments passing bills that try to sprint past complex problems. The result? Confusion, backlash, collapse. Speed without clarity is a disaster waiting to happen. Brown pulls us into the graveyard of failed fast moves to show that the real power isn't in momentum, it's in mission. She brings in Ginny Clark, yes, the executive leader who argues that management is not a detour on the way to leadership, it's foundational. Clark says that too many leaders treat management as a burden or phase, not as the art of plumbing, the hidden work of making structures dependable, systems real, alignment visible. Brown latches onto that. Leadership without plumbing is fantasy. If you don't manage your teams, your systems, your values, your vision collapses under its own weight. Brown pushes harder. Mission clarity isn't a tagline. It's not a motto you print on mugs. It's the discipline of defining what you will do, won't do, how you show up, and why you exist. When you chase every opportunity, you lose identity. You tire. Your people mutter, "What are we even doing here?" She shows that organizations with mission clarity survive chaos. Those without it dissolve in crisis. She weaves in stories, an organization that jumped into the DEI bandwagon without clarity, then wound up with cynicism and distrust. Another that laser focused on their values, turned down investor money that didn't align, and outlived competition. Her point, mission is the guardrail, speed is dangerous without it. Then she names the enemy, noise. In the age of crypto, AI, viral trends, meme stocks, we are drowning in noise. Every strategist is selling the next thing. But Brown warns that desire to chase novelty often means abandoning your true north. She quotes her conversations with Clark, "If we don't know what matters most, we will do everything, and nothing matters." That's a mic drop. Doing everything is suicide for significance. Brown also highlights how mission clarity locks us in paradox. Again, you must be clear enough to say no, yet flexible enough to adapt. If you rigidify mission, you become brittle. If you float mission, you become directionless. The real power is tension, consistent fidelity to principles while navigating turbulent reality. She drills into the practical. Clarify values, define boundaries, communicate relentlessly. She points to companies whose mission statements became living contracts, not hollow posters. When mission is in bones, decisions are easier. You say no, not out of fear, but out of devotion. You risk less because you align more. In today's news, we saw firms in 2025 forced to backtrack massive expansions because their brand promise had no grounding. CEOs announcing moonshots they had no infrastructure to support. Elon's companies launching bold new projects while their core divisions sputtered. That's mission drift. That's speed without soul. Brown dares you. If your mission is vague, you don't have one. If your mission is borrowed, you don't own it. If your mission is comfortable, you'll abandon it when profit calls. Clarity costs. Courage costs. But the alternative is decay. Mission clarity also shields against external pressure. In turbulent marketplaces, boards will demand quick results. Markets will shout pivot, media will push narratives. If your mission is solid, you'll have anchor points. You'll measure decisions against your mission, not against external applause. You won't chase what's trending, you'll deliver what matters. Ultimately, Brown teaches that mission is not the goal, it's the lodestar. Speed without mission is motion. Doing without meaning is noise. Leadership isn't what you chase, it's what you carry. Clarity is the gravity that holds everything else in orbit. Key idea, clarity anchors speed. Without mission clarity, fast becomes frantic, growth becomes scatter, influence becomes empty. Favorite quote, if we don't know what matters most, we will do everything and nothing matters. Steering into the slide, the future belongs to those who don't flinch. You think turbulence is the enemy? Then you've never flown a storm. The world in 2025 is spinning faster than ever. AI breakthroughs, geopolitical swings, climate tipping points, economic shockwaves. Boards demand certainty. Markets punish hesitation. Governments legislate with swagger, not humility. Against that backdrop, Brené Brown says, "Your job is not to avoid the slide. Your job is to steer into it." She doesn't sugarcoat it. She opens with futurist Amy Webb, who insists that disruption is the new normal. Webb warns, if your reflex is panic, you'll crash. If your reflex is rigidity, you'll fracture. The leaders who survive, those who thrive, will be the ones who can lean toward the uncertainty, not away from it. They'll steer into the slide, not pretend it doesn't exist. Brown layers in a companion tool, the above, below the line practice. It's simple, deceptively so. You're always operating from either fear, below the line, or courage, above the line. Fear leads to blame, avoidance, victim mentality, reactivity. Courage leads to ownership, curiosity, accountability, creativity. The gap between those modes is the throttle. You don't just shift once, you practice shifting. When crisis hits, you wind up operating below the line by default. Brown argues, the muscle you build in calm moments, the practice of returning above, is what saves you in collapse. She details how both Webb's advisory frameworks and her own people practice converge. In volatility, clarity of inner alignment matters more than clarity of forecast. Webb's point, you can't predict the future, but you can develop resilience, sensitivity, the ability to course correct mid-air. Brown's point, if your posture is reactive and your values fuzzy, then your course corrections will be chaos. She brings stories, organizations that tried to legislate certainty, then collapsed when the unexpected hit. Others that held tight to their principles, even when their revenue models were under siege, survived by pivoting with integrity. She warns, speed without discernment is self-destruction. The slide outpaces you. You need brakes, steering, alignment. She calls bullshit on leaders who say, we must move faster. No, Brown replies, we must move smarter, more anchored. The slide will come. Pressure, stress, ambiguity, fear-driven behavior. The question, will you flinch or will you ride it, adjust, hold your ground? Then she shows how above below the line is the practical interface. Next time your heart races, your finger points, your language turns reactive, that's you going below. The practice is to name it, pause, reset to above. Reframe, refocus, speak from ownership, not blame. Do it in your teams, in your relationships, in your culture. It's the real training for turbulence. She also surfaces a paradox. If you avoid all downward slides, you never learn how to climb out from them. If you stay too anchored, you become immovable in crisis. The task is not escape, it's navigation, being fluid, rooted, responsive. That's leadership in an age of collapse. Let's connect to real life. In 2025, governments impose radical policy swings when a crisis hits. Big tech pivots overnight. Industries locked in linear models are being gutted mid-cycle. Companies that have no above-below muscle, no courage threshold, crumble. The slide doesn't ask permission. It doesn't yield. It pulls your thin parts first, your clarity, your values, your courage. Brown warns, don't let your inner ground be the first to slip. When jewelry worth millions was stolen from the Louvre, yes, a real headline. What fell apart wasn't just security protocol, but the illusion that even storied institutions are immune to chaos. The slide always finds the weak joint. That theft is a metaphor. Your identity, your mission, your character, those are your vulnerable exhibits. If your interior is brittle, the shock hits there first. If you learn one thing from this, the future won't reward those with clean spreadsheets. It will reward those with clean souls, disciplined minds, and the courage to lean in. 1 foot in chaos, 1 foot in ground. Key idea: you don't wait for the slide to pass, you lean into it. Courageous leaders learn to steer while falling. Favorite quote: the slide never asks permission, it doesn't yield. Creative failure, falling forward into mastery. You've been told failure is part of success so many times it's become empty wallpaper, but you don't live the phrase, you choke on it. Brené Brown drags failure out of the shadows and makes you stare into it, hold it, even dance with it, because mastery isn't born from comfort. She forces the truth. The artist in you hides in the ruins. She leans on Sarah Lewis, whose work on mastery argues that peaks are rooted in valleys. That great art, innovation, leadership, they don't come from sterile ground. They come from wounds, collapse, necessity. Lewis claims that failure is not the enemy of mastery, it is the forge of mastery. You don't avoid falling, you learn how to fall forward, so each crash becomes a gravity-driven push upward. Brown pairs that with pocket presence, a practice she describes as cultivating small, embodied awareness in every moment to help you hold steadiness when failure strikes. Because failure itself is a storm, the only way not to get lost in it is to carry a subtle anchor in your body, presence, so that when everything breaks, you still carry you. She rejects the binary, success versus failure. That's lazy. She forces you into the tension. How much do you let the failure burn you, and how much do you let it build you? She shows how addicts of success, people whose identity is wrapped in achievement, fold under disappointment. They treat failure like a crime, not a tutor. But if your identity is tied to doing, you collapse when doing fails. Mastery requires that identity shift to competence and surrender. Brown lays out stories, athletes, artists, CEOs who were on fire, then fell publicly, darkly, then rose wiser. But here's what gets glossed over elsewhere. Their comebacks weren't the return to what they were. They were the birth of what they couldn't have seen before collapse. They redefined themselves around curiosity, resilience, humility, endurance. They absorbed the fracture. They didn't plaster over it. She argues that presence is your lifeline in failure. When your brain is shaking, your heart is pounding, your identity is quivering, you must remember to ground in your breath, your bones, the fact that this moment is passing. That practice is what keeps you from fleeing, denying, distracting. The moment you deny your failure, you betray your growth. She also calls bullshit on societies that crown only winners. That narrative, that only the perfect get to speak, silences artists, leaders, thinkers. It privileges illusion over process, image over depth. Brown forces a reframe. Maybe the failures, the scars, the contradictions are more trustworthy than the polished trophy. Maybe what's real is in the cracks. She ties this to culture. In a world obsessed with metrics, virality, number of likes, how many souls die looking perfect online? How many people quit because they can't allow themselves the shame of trying? She warns, those online success stories are often edited. The pain, the stumbles, the doubt are suppressed. But for those who practice pocket presence and let failure teach, the hidden fracture becomes wisdom. Let me shake you. You might be living on borrowed light. You take a win and act like it's permanent. You take a loss and act like it's terminal. That's ego. Real strength is something quieter. The ability to stay soft while shattered, to keep asking, what is this teaching me? When you wanted to scream, why me? Brown doesn't give you a sugar pill. She gives the method. Rumble with your failure. Talk to it. Name it. Map what broke. Lean into presence. Ground in small moments so the storm doesn't sweep you away. Rebuild with patience. Master is not a destination. It's a lifetime of small recoveries, small expansions, small rebuildings. In 2025, when markets crash, when startups flame out, when promises evaporate, who recovers? Not the ones who insisted everything must magnify. The ones who held presence in failure. The ones who said, I will fall, but I refuse to vanish. Because falling is not the end, vanishing is. Key idea: failure is the furnace of mastery. Falling forward and staying present is how strength becomes wisdom. Favorite quote: failure is not the opposite of mastery. It's the forge where mastery is made. Grounded confidence, the courage to belong to yourself. If you've been waiting for the chapter where you finally feel good about yourself, spoiler, that's not real. Brené Brown pummels that fantasy. True confidence doesn't come from having no doubts. It comes from belonging to yourself even when the world doubts you. Confidence is not an echo, it's a grounded root. She begins by slamming the typical interpretations of confidence, the loud, overcompensating kind, and says, that's not confidence. That's performance anxiety in disguise. Real confidence is quiet, resilient, and not dependent on external validation. External praise is a bonus, not the foundation. Brown digs into grounded confidence as a system, not a personality trait, not a cliche, a practiced, accountable framework built from vulnerability, discipline, and alignment. She argues that when your confidence is an act, it will crack under pressure. But when it's grounded in self-knowledge, values, and the work of spiritual psychological muscle, it stays unshaken. Enter Dan Pink and his idea of symphonic thinking, the capacity to hold multiple perspectives, shift modes, play, empathy, analysis, creativity, and to orchestrate them in harmony. Brown uses it to show that confidence isn't one note, it's a symphony. You don't act like a rigid monolith. You let different internal voices converse. You let empathy, curiosity, creativity, rigor all play together. And that internal harmony becomes your confidence. She shares stories of leaders who lost confidence when their identity was only wrapped in performance. They forgot their core. When criticism came, they shattered. But other leaders leaned into grounded confidence. They had internal contracts. They practiced rumbling with doubt. They faced fear. They reclaimed their boundaries. Brown contends that grounded confidence is about belonging to yourself, even if no one shows up. Because what happens when everyone leaves? What happens when your job is gone, your accolades fade, your relationships fracture? If your confidence lived in them, you collapse. But if your confidence lives in you, you carry through. It's a radical kind of freedom. She doesn't sanitize the pain. She says this: sometimes your inner critic will roar, your body will tremble, your mind will scream lies. But your job, your practice, is to refuse the lie, to stand firm, to whisper, I belong here, I choose me, while the world yells against you. That's the muscle. Brown also reckons with culture. In a world that values perfection, that filters everything, that tries to sell you effortless confidence, she posits that grounded confidence is countercultural. You'll feel like the odd one. You'll be seen as too soft, too inconsistent, too unpredictable. That's the price of humanity in a brittle world. She offers practices, naming the lie, writing internal contracts, daily reflections, checking alignment between values and decisions. She invites you to play with the tension of confidence and humility, not pretending you're perfect, but owning your capacity to grow. She doesn't tell you to feel unshakable all the time. She teaches you to return when you wobble. That return is your confidence. In 2025, we see public figures collapsing under the weight of curated confidence. Scandals erupt. Social media personas implode. Why? Because their confidence was flatter than the screen. They had no root. Brown's message is urgent. No matter how loud the world is, your inner ground must be louder. Otherwise, the cracks become the story. When famous jewelry was stolen from the Louvre, no alarm system could protect what was interior, their identity, their integrity, their narrative. The outer is fragile, the inner must be stronger. Your confidence is your Louvre. Protect it. Key idea: confidence isn't performance. It's a rooted belonging, a disciplined, humble, resilient posture grown from authenticity and internal coherence. Favorite quote, confidence is not volume. Confidence is the quiet heartbeat that says, I belong here even if no one affirms me yet. Anchored leadership, the power of accountability and alignment. The world doesn't need more leaders, it needs fewer performers. That's the blunt truth nobody wants to say out loud. Leadership today has been hijacked by optics, curated vulnerability, performative accountability, and slick mission statements that say everything yet mean nothing. Everyone wants to look like a leader, but no one wants to be one when it starts to hurt. Brené Brown, together with Aiko Bethea, tears this illusion to shreds. They say leadership isn't about position, influence, or titles. It's about alignment. And alignment doesn't mean being perfect. It means being accountable when you're not. It means choosing integrity over image, especially when image pays better. Brown argues that leadership without self-awareness is like a ship with no anchor. It looks majestic when the sea is calm, but the moment the storm hits, it's tossed wherever the waves please. Anchored leadership, however, is forged in the storm. It's born from the grit of facing yourself, the hypocrisy, the contradictions, the unspoken fears, and refusing to keep pretending they don't exist. Aiko Bethea calls it brave accountability. Not the checkbox kind, not the we'll review that in Q4 corporate flavor. It's the kind that rips away your comfort zone and makes you stand in your own mess long enough to clean it, not justify it. It's what separates real leaders from mascots. When Brown writes about leadership, she doesn't mean the CEOs on magazine covers. She means the parents who apologize to their kids instead of doubling down on pride. She means the managers who admit they don't have all the answers. The teachers who say, I was wrong. Leadership isn't about being followed. It's about being trusted. And trust is the currency of accountability. And then David White crashes in with a line that changes everything. Just beyond yourself is where you need to be. It's not poetic fluff. It's the manifesto of every real leader who's ever existed. To lead is to live slightly past your comfort zone, to dwell in that thin line between control and surrender. That's the ground of transformation, the tension between who you are and who you're terrified to become. Brown says alignment isn't static. You don't arrive at it. You maintain it every day, like balance on a tightrope. Every choice either pulls you closer to your values or drags you further away. When leaders lose alignment, they stop leading, even if the world keeps calling them boss. And this isn't just philosophical. Look around. The US economy in late 2025 is a perfect metaphor. The Federal Reserve is trying to balance inflation that refuses to die while the job market cools down and layoffs quietly rise. Everyone's talking stability while holding their breath for the next rate cut. It's all noise, all reaction, no anchor. That's what happens when leadership becomes performance, volatility, both economic and moral. Anchored leadership says, enough. Stop outsourcing your compass. Stop waiting for permission to act with integrity. You don't need a new system. You need to stop betraying your own. You want to fix your team? Fix your alignment first. You want trust? Be trustworthy when it costs you something. You want to change culture? Model accountability when no one's clapping. Brown and Bethea both argue that courage without alignment turns reckless, and accountability without empathy turns cruel. The power is in the fusion. Empathy that doesn't coddle, and accountability that doesn't humiliate. That's what real leadership looks like when it's not auditioning for applause. White's poem ends where Brown's research begins, with a call to responsibility that feels almost sacred. You are being asked to cross the threshold between pretending and becoming, between reacting and responding, between talking about change and actually embodying it. And here's the paradox: anchored leadership doesn't make you rigid, it makes you free. Because once you stop lying to yourself, the world can't manipulate you anymore. Once your worth isn't tied to approval, Your decisions become honest. Once you stop performing leadership, you finally start practicing it. The Louvre recently made headlines for a jewelry heist, priceless pieces stolen from a space meant to protect them. That's how unanchored leadership works. You build walls around what you think matters, your title, your reputation, your brand, and forget that the real treasure is internal. Sooner or later, what isn't guarded by integrity will get stolen by ego. Leadership, in the end, is a quiet act of returning, over and over again, to your values, to your word, to the truth that scares you most. It's not glamorous, it's not trending, but it's real, and real right now is revolutionary. Key idea: leadership isn't about authority, it's about alignment, the daily uncomfortable practice of matching your actions to your values when it would be easier not to. Favorite quote: just beyond yourself is where you need to be. Half a step into self-forgetting and the rest restored by what you'll meet. The locked room, breaking the barriers within. You know what's funny? People spend their entire lives trying to escape cages that they built themselves. They call it burnout, imposter syndrome, or just not feeling motivated lately. But if you stripped the noise away, you'd see what it really is. Fear dressed up as logic. You can tell yourself you're just being realistic, but deep down, you know you've locked the door from the inside. And that's what this whole thing is about. Brené Brown calls it lock-in power. That strange psychological moment when your own beliefs become your prison guards. You tell yourself you're being responsible, grounded, rational, but what you're really doing is avoiding. Avoiding the thing you swore you'd face one day when the timing felt right. Spoiler, it never does. Here's the problem. Courage doesn't need perfect timing, it needs honesty. But honesty is expensive. It costs you comfort, it costs you illusion, it costs you that false sense of safety you've been clinging to like a worn-out life jacket. That's what Brown means by lock-through power. The only way out is through. You don't escape the room by running from it. You dismantle the walls one truth at a time. Now, in the book, she lays this out with surgical precision. She talks about how emotional lock-in happens not because we're weak, but because we've been rewarded for it. We were told composure is strength. We were told silence is maturity. We were told not to make a scene, so we didn't. And over time, that quiet became concrete. But here's the twist. Those walls were never meant to protect you. They were built to contain your potential. And if you think that's poetic exaggeration, take a look at the world around you. The US economy is hanging in the balance again. Inflation's cooling, but spending is shaky, and layoffs are creeping through industries faster than anyone's admitting. Everyone's talking about resilience and adapting to uncertainty, but most people are just bracing, not evolving. They've locked themselves into fear of what might happen, so they stop making anything happen. It's the same story in leadership, in art, in life. The greatest danger isn't failure, it's stagnation disguised as stability. People brag about being realistic, as if realism isn't just fear with a better PR team. Brown's work on transformation makes this painfully clear. The most paralyzing moments in life are rarely external. They're the quiet ones, when no one's watching, when you realize you've spent years negotiating with your own potential and losing. That's the locked room. The one where you keep the truth you're afraid to say out loud. The one where you store your real opinions because it's not the right time. The one where you've hung motivational quotes over the cracks in the walls just to make it look like growth. And the thing is, most people will never open that door. Because freedom demands confrontation, and confrontation demands self-respect. You can't transform what you refuse to name. Brown calls this the anatomy of breakthrough. She says the body and the mind both resist change. Not because change is bad, but because change threatens the stories that have kept us safe. Think about that. Your brain would rather keep you miserable in a known environment than risk the unknown, even if that unknown could make you thrive. That's why surrender is the most radical act of transformation, because surrender isn't giving up, It's giving in. It's saying, I'm done pretending this version of me is enough. But that kind of truth costs more than most people are willing to pay, which is why so many stay locked in rooms of their own making, whispering about potential while polishing their excuses. The Louvre had jewelry worth millions stolen right under the guards' noses, security cameras, alarms, sensors, and still gone. Do you get it? The world's most secure museum couldn't protect what it didn't expect to lose. That's how your inner world works too. The treasures, your creativity, your confidence, your conviction get stolen slowly, quietly, by the parts of you you refuse to inspect. And before you know it, you're standing in an empty room explaining to yourself why the theft wasn't your fault. But here's what Brown's trying to teach. Your power doesn't come from being unbreakable. It comes from learning how to rebuild over and over again. She writes that transformation happens in the tension between breaking and becoming, in that moment where you're stripped of all pretenses, staring at your own limitations and deciding that you're still not done. And that's where most people quit, right before the door unlocks, because transformation doesn't announce itself, it whispers. It's in the decision to tell the truth when lying would be easier. It's in choosing accountability instead of self-pity. It's in refusing to outsource your courage to the next motivational podcast. Look, if you're waiting for the right time, stop. The right time was probably 5 excuses ago. If you're waiting for permission, stop. You're the only one who can grant it. The key was never lost. You've just been too afraid to turn it. Key idea. Every locked room in your life, fear, shame, self-doubt, is self-constructed. And the key to every single one is the same. The courage to confront the truth even when it breaks you. Favorite quote, the key is not out there. It's in your hands. Always was. Always will be. The warrior's reward. What happens when you refuse to quit? They tell you to trust the process. But what they don't tell you is that the process will gut you first. It'll take your pride, your certainty, your clean timelines, and leave you sitting in the dirt wondering if all this effort even matters. That's the part nobody posts about. We glamorize grit, but let's be honest, resilience isn't glamorous. It's brutal. It's 3 a.m. anxiety. It's holding it together in front of people who have no idea you're falling apart inside. It's showing up when quitting would be so much easier. That's what Brené Brown gets right in Strong Ground. She doesn't romanticize resilience, she dissects it. She writes about leaders, athletes, and creators who've hit the wall so hard that it cracked their identity wide open. Abby Wambach, one of the greatest soccer players to ever live, said the real victory didn't come from the medals, but from what happened after the applause stopped. Because when the stadium goes silent, that's when you find out who you really are. And that's the part most people never reach, because we quit too soon. We mistake exhaustion for failure. We confuse discomfort with danger. We walk away right before the moment of transformation, the one that doesn't feel like fireworks, but like surrender. Look around. We're in an economy built on quitting quietly. The American job market's shrinking in confidence even as inflation stabilizes. Over 4 million people left their jobs last quarter, citing burnout, disillusionment, or just needing a break. But let's be honest, sometimes that break is just another form of escape. Everyone wants purpose, but no one wants the process. Everyone wants results, but no one wants the repetition. Brown would call this the myth of arrival. The illusion that if we can just reach some imagined finish line, the promotion, the recognition, the number in the bank account, the pain will finally stop. But it never does, because real peace doesn't come from winning. It comes from alignment, from knowing you didn't give up on yourself when it got hard. That's the warrior's reward. Not glory, not validation, peace. And peace doesn't show up as fireworks. It shows up quietly, in the mirror, in the morning, when you realize you've survived another day of your own self-doubt. Brown's research hits this nerve over and over. The people who live wholehearted lives aren't the ones who never fail. They're the ones who redefine failure as data. Every fall is feedback. Every loss is a teacher. Every scar is a syllabus. That's the paradox. You build strength by breaking. You build clarity by being confused. You build courage by being terrified and still moving forward. But we've built a society obsessed with the win. We post our highlight reels and edit out the struggle, and then we wonder why everyone feels like a fraud. The truth is, mastery doesn't look like confidence. It looks like consistency. It's not loud. It's not viral. It's showing up over and over until what used to break you now builds you. And this is where Brown's philosophy gets personal. She writes about how shame and perfectionism are twin thieves of resilience. You can't bounce back from what you refuse to acknowledge. If you can't admit you fell, you'll never learn how to rise. That's the trap. We're so obsessed with appearing strong that we never develop real strength. So let me ask you, what's your definition of winning? Because if your answer involves applause, followers, or approval, you've already lost. The world will never clap loud enough to drown out your own insecurity. Brown's insight through Abby Wambach's story is profound. The true warrior isn't the one who wins the game, it's the one who knows how to rebuild after it's over. That's where the peace comes in. The kind of peace that doesn't depend on anything external. It's earned through failure, through forgiveness, through finally being okay with not being perfect. And the irony? Once you stop chasing the win, you start winning in ways that actually matter. You stop performing and start participating. You stop trying to control outcomes and start mastering effort. That's the secret the high achievers never tell you, because it sounds boring. But the boring stuff is what builds the foundation for extraordinary lives. And just like Brown teaches, the hardest part of growth isn't the climb. It's staying grounded when you've reached the top and realizing there's no finish line. The reward isn't a trophy. It's the quiet knowing that you didn't fold when life pressed you hardest. You can chase every metric, every milestone, every mountain. But if you don't have integrity when the lights go out, it's all meaningless. Because resilience isn't about bouncing back. It's about building forward. Key idea. The ultimate reward for refusing to quit isn't glory, it's peace. The kind that comes from knowing you stayed true when everything else fell apart. Favorite quote. The true measure of success isn't winning. It's how many times you were willing to start again. Between stimulus and response, the space where power lives, they say people are more reactive than reflective now. And they're right. You scroll, you doom scroll, you argue with strangers on the internet, and you call it awareness. But awareness isn't knowing what's wrong with the world, it's knowing what's happening inside of you before you become part of the chaos. That's the war no one trains you for. The war between stimulus and response, between the thing that happens and the thing you choose to do next. It's the tiniest space in the world, and the only one that actually matters. Brené Brown's Strong Ground doesn't just talk about leadership, it talks about emotional self-mastery. She doesn't say it like a therapist, she says it like a general who's been to battle, because that's what leadership really is. Not commanding others, but controlling the battlefield within. She builds from Viktor Frankl's truth. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. Every idea in this section of her work flows from that. She draws it into the context of modern pressure, how executives, parents, students, and creators are losing the ability to pause. And she's right. We live in a world engineered to steal your pause. Algorithms feed on reactivity. News thrives on outrage. Politicians profit from division. The economy doesn't want reflection, it wants consumption. Look at America right now. Inflation might be cooling, but patience is gone. Consumer confidence dropped again this month, even as spending hit record highs. That's not economics, that's emotion. A nation chasing dopamine because waiting feels like dying. We don't stop anymore. We just refresh. We don't breathe. We just broadcast. And then we wonder why we're so empty. Brown connects this loss of pause to what she calls terminal resistance, that deep fear of slowing down because stillness feels like failure. It's why leaders keep pushing, even when their teams are burning out. It's why creators keep producing, even when their art feels hollow. It's why you check your phone before your feet hit the floor in the morning, because silence exposes the truth. And that truth is simple but horrifying. You're not reacting to life, you're reacting to your own unprocessed fear. This is where her collaboration with thinkers like Dr. Joy Bolamwini becomes crucial. Bolamwini, who studies algorithmic bias and human accountability in tech, exposes the same flaw in a different system, one built of code instead of neurons. Her work reveals how bias is automated because reflection is absent. We're building machines that think faster than we do and feel nothing while doing it. That's not progress, that's acceleration without consciousness. And in leadership, in relationships, in everything that matters, that's death. Brown's brilliance here is how she drags this abstract concept back down to the dirt. She doesn't let you escape into theory. She forces you to look at your real life, the argument with your partner, the hard conversation you avoided at work, the email you sent too soon. She asks the question that no productivity hack ever will. Who were you trying to protect when you reacted that way? And that's where everything cracks open, because the truth is, most of our reactions are old survival strategies, wearing modern clothes. Anger is fear in a louder tone. Control is anxiety with better posture. Detachment, just dressed up exhaustion. We call it leadership, but it's often just defense. And here's the brutal part. Your nervous system doesn't care if you're a CEO or a student. It only knows safety and danger. When you react without reflection, you surrender your agency to your oldest fears. You become predictable, programmable, manipulable. You become what systems, both digital and human, want you to be, reactive. But in that space, that split second before you reply, shout, scroll, or self-destruct, there's your freedom. It's microscopic, but it's infinite. It's the space where you stop being your habits and start being human again. Brown calls this the practice of staying grounded. It's what her entire philosophy builds toward, the ability to remain steady in chaos, not because the world slowed down, but because you did. And let's not pretend this is easy. The space between stimulus and response isn't comfortable. It's confronting. It's where the truth waits. It's where your excuses evaporate. It's where you realize that your triggers don't come from the world, they come from your wounds. That's why the world avoids this work. It's easier to stay angry than to get honest, easier to fight shadows than to face yourself. But that's the power of this space. It doesn't just change your reaction, it rewires your identity. Because every time you pause, you prove that you are not your impulses. Every time you choose stillness over survival mode, you reclaim control from the chaos. It's not about being calm, it's about being conscious. The leaders of tomorrow, the real ones, won't be the loudest voices in the room. They'll be the ones who can hear themselves think while the world screams for a reaction. And maybe that's the final paradox Brené Brown leaves us with. The strongest ground you can stand on is the space you don't rush to fill. Key idea. Real power doesn't come from control or reaction. It comes from the conscious pause between the two. Favorite quote. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Conclusion. We've reached the end, or at least the part most people call the end. But that's the lie, isn't it? Because transformation doesn't end with revelation, it ends with choice. The choice to live everything you've just learned, when no one's watching, when it's not convenient, when it costs you the comfort you've spent your whole life building. That's what Strong Ground is really about. It's not a book about leadership. It's not a book about courage. It's a book about finally growing up emotionally, about standing still in the storm long enough to stop blaming the thunder. Because here's the truth nobody wants to hear. Your life isn't waiting for better circumstances, it's waiting for better decisions. And every decision you make, every word you say, every silence you keep, either builds your character or betrays it. You want transformation? It's not in the next seminar or podcast or self-help reel. It's in the moment you stop running from the truth of who you are. It's when you realize you can't lead anyone until you face yourself. Every page of this book was a mirror. Brené Brown doesn't hand you comfort. She hands you a shovel and points to the dirt under your own feet. She says, dig here. Because you can't stand on strong ground until you've unearthed what's been buried. From victory to vulnerability, from paradox to transformation, from mission clarity to anchored leadership, all of it builds to one truth. Real courage isn't about winning, it's about staying in integrity when the game turns ugly. And right now, the world is ugly. We're living in a time where outrage pays more than honesty, where speed is mistaken for progress, where silence is seen as weakness, and empathy is treated like a liability. We celebrate performers instead of leaders, reactions instead of reflection, noise instead of wisdom. But that's why strong ground matters more than ever, because it teaches you how to lead in an age where most people are just performing strength. You can fake confidence, but you can't fake calm. You can fake competence, but you can't fake character. And when the storms come, and they will, it won't be your brand, your followers, or your resume that save you. It'll be your ability to stay grounded when everything else comes unhinged. Every story in this book is a map back to yourself. It's a reminder that transformation isn't found in the next breakthrough. It's found in the breakdowns you stop running from. It's found in the apology you finally say, the boundary you finally hold, the silence you finally learn to respect. That's the art of staying still in the storm. That's the anatomy of transformation. That's the paradox of being human, fragile and unstoppable, broken and divine, terrified and brave all at once. So if you've made it this far, don't just close this summary and move on with your day. Don't scroll, don't click away, sit in it, feel it, let it burn a little, because the real work starts when the video ends. If you want to understand this deeper, if you want to read the words that started this fire, go buy Strong Ground by Brené Brown. Support the author. Study it like a manual, not a memoir. Because this isn't entertainment, it's education. And the education isn't supposed to make you comfortable, it's supposed to make you conscious. Now, take everything you've heard and remember this. The world doesn't change when you feel inspired. The world changes when you start living differently. So go lead, even when it's unpopular. Go tell the truth, even when it shakes your voice. Go stand on your strong ground, even when the whole world is trembling. Because if there's one thing Brené Brown has taught us, it's this. You don't need a crown to lead. You need courage to stay. And if you've still got breath in your lungs, then your story's not over. It's just getting honest. Now go live like it.